Lumber futures have been coming down since March of this year and are currently at the lowest level in almost 3 years. But where are prices headed? Are we going to see spikes like we've seen in the past few years, or will prices continue to decline? Stick around and I'll tell you. When we look at lumber prices over the past year, we can see that prices have come down by around 70%. That is fantastic for us consumers, but is that a trend that's going to continue? Well, before I answer that question, I just want to talk a little bit about how we even measure lumber prices in the first place. For lumber prices, there could be so many variances in so many places because of costs like transportation, labor, regulations, and the like. And so the best way to measure prices more broadly and generically is by looking at lumber futures. And so whenever I talk about lumber prices, I will quote lumber's futures prices. But what is a lumber future, and how does that actually relate to the price that we pay for wood? Lumber is a commodity. A commodity is a raw material that can be used to produce other things. Other commodities are things like crude oil, copper, gold, beef, or wheat. Commodities can be bought and sold on an exchange, and people and companies buy and sell commodity for a bunch of different reasons. Sometimes as a hedge or protection to protect against future losses or future price increases, sometimes as an investment, sometimes as pure speculation. In fact, I made a whole video all about this a while back, and so if you want to check that out to learn more about commodities futures, you can find a link here in the corner or in the description. When commodities are traded, they use a standard measure. Gold is traded by the ounce, copper is traded by the pound, and wheat is traded by the bushel. Lumber is traded by something called the board foot, or board feet. To calculate board feet, you take the width of a board in inches, divide it by 12, and times that by the length of the board in feet, and then times that by the thickness of the board in inches. So a standard 8-foot 2x4 would be 4 inches wide, divided by 12, times 8 feet long, times 2 inches thick, for a total of 5.33 or 5 1/3 board feet. Each lumber commodity contract is quoted per 1,000 board feet of random length lumber. So it doesn't have to be an 8-foot 2x4, it could be a 12-foot 2x6, or any other cut of wood. Now it does get more complicated than this because there are all different species of wood, and then there are categories like hardwoods and softwoods and dimensional lumber, and they can all be traded differently. But when I quote lumber futures prices, I'm talking about the price for softwood, spruce, pine, or fir. That's the type of wood that's usually used in residential construction. So how does that translate to the wood that you buy? Well, like I said, one 6-foot 2x4 is about 5 1/3 board feet, which means that 1,000 board feet is about 188 boards, or almost exactly the size of a pallet of 2x4s at your local big box store. So when a 2x4 costs $3.75 each, you times that by 188, and that gives you a price of $705 per 1,000 board feet. That's pretty high considering recent lumber futures prices. So what makes up the difference? Well, lumber futures are essentially wholesale prices. In fact, to buy one lumber futures contract, you would have to buy 110,000 board feet, which would be enough lumber to build about 7 houses. So the people that are paying those prices are the large suppliers, retailers, and middlemen, and they have costs, things like transportation costs, employee salaries, rent, utilities, insurance, taxes, and all the things that go into running a business. And they also have a little bit of profit margin socked in there as well. Now, I'll get back to retail prices in just a moment, but before then, let's talk about lumber futures prices in the future. The thing about lumber is that the demand comes primarily from residential home construction and repairs and or remodeling of existing homes. This graph from the Federal Reserve shows that new housing starts are coming down, meaning that fewer homes are being built. Home builders are also having trouble with the deals that they've already made. In fact, the largest home builder in the country, D.R. Horton, announced recently that 1/3 of all of their home buyers backed out of their new deals recently, and that new orders have decreased by 15%. That is a significant decrease, and it doesn't bode well for the housing market in general. Now, the reason for that is that people just can't afford to buy a new home, not with inflation as high as it is, and not with prices increasing as they have over the past few years, and definitely not with interest rates going up as high as they are. In fact, mortgage rates are currently over 7%, and that's the highest mortgage rate in the past 20 years. Now, all of this means that the demand for lumber is going to be low and stay low until something changes in the housing market, and that may take years. The price of lumber, however, is not just a factor of demand, but also of supply. The lumber companies had windfall profits over the past few years, and they have used some of that money to consolidate and modernize some of their facilities. That's great because it means that in some cases they'll be able to do more with less. But that isn't true across the board. There are still older facilities out there, and costs are still pretty high. Transportation costs are high. Salaries have definitely gone up, which means that there's a point at which lumber prices dip so low that the mills can't afford to make a profit. And in those cases, they'll actually cut back production or shut down mills entirely until those prices go back up to the point where they can actually make money. This means that there's a floor to lumber prices, and they really can't go below that because that supply will be cut off and that will push prices up. Again, that is all until something changes. When home prices become more reasonable and interest rates go down to the point where people can afford to start buying homes, then you'll see more demand. But in my opinion, that's probably a couple years away. So I think that lumber futures prices are going to stay pretty close to where they are now. There will be fluctuations here and there, but the huge swings and increases that we've seen over the past couple of years are not going to happen again anytime soon. So that's lumber futures. Let's go back and talk about retail prices, the prices that we pay at our local big box stores. So I mentioned before that the prices here where I'm at in North Texas are $3.75 per 2x4. And that makes the price that we're paying for 1,000 board feet of 2x4s about $705.
I can't take it, Jerry. It's too much. It's too much.
Now that is significantly higher than the current board foot price. And to me, that's too high. And what it says to me is that retail prices still have more room to fall, even if futures prices don't. And that's because retailers are still clearing out the inventory that they bought when prices were much higher. But once that older inventory is cleared out, I think that we're going to see lower retail prices. So I think that's great news. It means that we can get back to our woodworking projects, back to our DIY projects, back to our home improvements and all those things we've been putting off for years. Now, if you don't want to wait until those things change, I've got a video for you. You can check it out here that will show you how to find lumber for your project without spending an arm and a leg.
Woo! Free wood!
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to like it and subscribe to my channel. We'll see you in the next one.